All right, future policymakers, welcome. Today we are diving into a really pivotal moment in India's economic history, the liberalization of its agricultural trade. We're going to distill the core strategy and the key lessons from this massive, massive undertaking. So let's get right into it.
Here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll set the scene, get the context. Then, we'll walk through the 6-step reform playbook. That's the core strategy. We'll meet the key players who made it all happen, quickly define some must-know terms, and finally, we'll look at the big question, what's next? A full briefing, all right here.
So first things first, let's get the context right. This wasn't just about tweaking a few rules here and there. No, this was about a fundamental philosophical change for one of the largest agricultural economies on the entire planet, a huge shift.
This one sentence, it basically captures the entire change in mindset. The focus went from controlling the market to improving its performance. Think about that. It's a move from the government acting as a gatekeeper to the government acting as a facilitator, a really crucial distinction.
Think of it like this. The old system was kind of like a tightly controlled dam. The government decided exactly how much water, or, trade, flowed through and when. The new paradigm? Well, that was about opening the floodgates and letting the river of market forces find its own path, guided by new stuff like e-trading and the pressures of global competition. So, how do you actually open those floodgates without just causing total chaos? Well, you need a plan, a blueprint. And in this case, a very clear 6-step reform playbook was put into action. Let's break down what that looked like.
The strategy was really smart because it was both comprehensive and sequential. See, it started at home, right? Building a solid foundation by reforming the domestic markets first. Only then did it open the doors to the world by liberalizing trade. It tore down old systems while also building up new global standards for things like food safety and intellectual property, and finally, it started building totally new marketing channels for the future.
And look, this isn't just some theory we're talking about. This right here is Table 21, the actual blueprint from the policy report. You can see the specific actions they took under each of those 6 steps, from getting rid of licenses to changing tariffs. It was a really methodical, step-by-step process.
But a playbook is just a piece of paper without a team to actually run the place. So let's take a look at the key institutions that were tasked with making all these reforms a reality. Who were the agents of change on the ground? So you had this whole cast of characters, right? You had bodies like APRA that were laser-focused on exports, and infrastructure giants like the Central Warehousing Corporation handling storage. You had groups focused on domestic quality, and then you had others like the Coffee Board that had to completely reinvent themselves in this new world.
To really get a feel for how big this transformation was in practice, let's just zoom in on one of these institutions, the Coffee Board. It's actually a perfect little mini-story of this whole entire shift.
Okay, think of it this way. Before 1995, the Coffee Board was kind of like a mandatory university meal plan. Every student, or in this case, every coffee grower, had to go through them. They set the menu, they set the price, that was it. But after liberalization, it became more like a food court inspector. The board wasn't selling the coffee anymore. Instead, its job was to make sure every single stall, every exporter, was meeting really high-quality standards for the global market, a total change in role.
All right, quick vocab session. If you're going to make good policy, you got to speak the language. So let's quickly nail down a few key terms from our playbook that every policymaker absolutely needs to know.
First up, a tariff. Super simple, right? It's just a tax on imports. It makes foreign stuff more expensive, usually to protect your domestic industries. The key takeaway for a policymaker is that modifying this tariff structure was one of the biggest levers they pulled to open up trade. Next, SPS measures. I know, it sounds super technical, but it's really just about food safety and quality standards. Here's why it matters. If you want to sell your produce in, say, Europe or Japan, you have to meet their SPS rules. Standardizing these was absolutely essential for Indian agriculture to get into those big, lucrative global markets.
And finally, TRIPS. This is all about protecting intellectual property. And for agriculture, this is huge. It ensures that the unique value of a product like Darjeeling tea, which can only come from one specific place in the world, is legally protected everywhere. It literally turns a place name into a valuable global brand.
So, we've seen the plan, we've met the players, we know the key terms. But what was the verdict? Did it all work? Let's turn to the final assessment from our source document. The initial assessment was one of cautious optimism. This quote tells us the authors felt the changes were good. They were definitely moving in the right direction, but they also felt a real sense of urgency. The progress was there, but it wasn't enough, and it wasn't fast enough.
And that brings us to the report's powerful concluding thought. The authors framed the entire process as an unfinished canvas. I love that metaphor. The initial sketch was there, the outline was good, but huge parts of the painting were still blank. It was a work in progress, far from complete.
So I'll leave you with this question. As you look at this unfinished canvas of reform, from domestic markets to global trade, from infrastructure to intellectual property, where would you apply the next brushstroke? What's the most critical area to focus on now to accelerate that pace and complete the picture? That's really the challenge for your generation of policymakers.